a short story called Saturn Devouring His Son, the story of the first ever Spartan to be infected by the Flood in Halo lore. Now, this story, as you can imagine, is a huge deal, but before we even get to the story itself, we need to break down its title. Saturn Devouring His Son is an infamously haunting painting done by Spanish romanticist Francisco Goya in the mid-19th century. The painting is widely regarded as the most disturbing piece of art in human history, depicting the actions of the Titan Cronus in Greek mythology, or, as he was known to the Romans, Saturn. After usurping his father, a prophecy was foretold by Gaia, the humanization of Earth in Greek mythology, that one of Saturn's sons would eventually usurp him as he had done to his father. And so, as the painting depicts, whenever his queen would give birth to a child, Saturn would devour it. Now, the painting itself is incredibly haunting. The gore is horrifyingly well depicted, and Saturn's facial expression is, well, just one of pure insanity. I mean, look at those eyes. But what's arguably even more haunting are the details that surround the painting. Goya's motivations and his mental state during its creation. Saturn Devouring His Son is a part of a unique collection of paintings by Goya called the Black Paintings. Paintings created without commission, not on tapestry or canvas, but on the walls of his own house, the Villa of the Deaf Man. Paintings that Goya never intended for anyone else to see. Early on in his life, Goya painted pretty bright, positive-looking paintings, but after contracting a mystery illness in 1795, he became deaf, and instantly his paintings took a more deranged turn, culminating in the Black Pictures, and the most disturbing work of art in human history. One that Goya himself didn't even name because it wasn't created for anybody else to see. It was created for him to transpose his disturbed mental state and thoughts about the, then in his eyes, failing, disease and war-riddled country of Spain into art form, and the result was something horrific. But what relevance does the painting have to the story besides, of course, it being named after it? Well, Saturn to me represents the Flood, a once ruling dominant force, and his son represents humanity, in this case, the Spartans, ultimately children of its own creation, seeking to stamp down and eradicate its father. That's the kind of metaphorical link. The obvious link is the, whole devouring part. Ultimately, I think this is such a cool parallel to draw, especially for this story, because not just the painting itself, but also all the surrounding details share that same level of bleakness and disturbia as the Flood. So, the story takes place in the year 2556, which is 4 years prior to Halo Infinite, and only a year after Hunters in the Dark, in which the Ark's monitor, the now dead 000 Tragic Solitude, opened the portal back to Earth and wreaked havoc on the planet and also its entire defense fleet to harvest materials to repair the Ark. In the wake of the destruction of Earth's defense fleet, the UNSC placed great importance on partnerships between private corporations to aid in the reconstruction of these destroyed fleets. Enter today's partnership between Imbrium Machine Complex, who are responsible for the creation of a number of Gen 2 and Gen 3 Mjolnir armor sets, and the BXR Mining Corporation. The two joined forces to establish a survey and mining operation on a gas giant's asteroid belt in the Marseille system, within which was a planetoid named LV-31, or LV for short, in which the corporations set up their habitat. Enter Julian Donny, an ex-Marine who joined the Corps pretty late in the war, but didn't want to serve in the UNSC anymore now that the Covenant were history. It was never Julian's calling. Instead, he wanted to find some sort of autonomy in his own life, and so he signed a survey and securities contract with IMC, his prior experience making him right at home in a job that had potentially hazardous assignments, like the one he was about to embark on. Speaking with Abe, a seasoned veteran of IMC's Hazmat Corps, as the two geared up in their Osteo suits before embarking on the assignment, Abe says that the assignment pertains to a discovery of dramatic proportions. One of BXR's scans had discovered a repository of refined foreigner alloy deep within Site 22, a mining site on one of the belt's asteroids. If recovered, this dig could reap retirement-level rewards for Julian, Abe, and the crew. Mox, another veteran of the IMC who had been with the corporation for well over a decade at this point, came in and revealed more about the repository. It wasn't just some inert cache of alloy, the repository was a whole damn foreigner ship. All of a sudden, Julian understood why IMC were deploying several hazmat squads to the site. Who knows what lurked within? Mox, Abe and Julian made their final equipment checks and also made sure that they were subscribed to Hidden Xperia, as you should, right now, hit that big red button before departing LV aboard an IMC Pelican to the surface of Site 22.
Silence, cold, empty, hunger, dark, barrier. Hunger, time, silence, hunger, trapped.
On their way to the surface, Julian blasts the latest track by band Errant V down his audio channel, a band that he can't wait to see live once the mission is over. How very combat evolved. As the Pelican touches down and the troop bay opens, the team are presented with a glittering starfield punctuated by the gas giant's bright blue hue and the grey-brown surface of the asteroid. Welcome to Site 22. BXR's EM-120 augers, heavy yet delicate deep mining tools, littered the landscape of the asteroid, but all within half a kilometre of Site 22 had been shut off. Julian, Abe and Mox rendezvous with engineers at the mouth of a small cave, carved by the augers, which leads down to the repository. The engineers state that they have no idea how the ship became wrapped in the rock of the asteroid, but at the end of the day, the why didn't matter to them, neither did the what. All that mattered was how they planned on getting it out. As they discussed the how, Julian began feeling an immense sense of curiosity as he stared down the mouth of the cave, but his longing gaze was interrupted by Abe, asking Mox what the plan was. BXR were to re-establish a perimeter around the site and recalibrate their equipment to bust the ship open. Mox assigned the IMC hazmat crew their positions. Lance and West, position 1. Beck and Artie, position 2. Louisa and Oswald, position 3. And Abe and Julian, position 4. T-minus 5 minutes until they started knocking.
Sound, light, sound, hunger, movement, closer, closer. Armored casket, hunger, sound, light, freedom, food, weave, circuit, command, open.
An hour into BXR's attempt at unsealing the ship with their augers, and very little had changed. With the team's collective patience running dry, Mox ordered Beck and Artie off position 2 and Abe and Julian off position 4 to check their hazmat suits' heat seals and descend into the cave opening to get a closer look at the vessel themselves. The ship was only a dozen meters in, and the cave was still emanating the latent heat of the auger's beams, but Julian spotted some kind of shimmer, something strange happening to the target's alloy surface, almost as if it was rippling like a liquid or some sort of metallic skin. He looked back at Abe, asking if he saw the same thing, but Abe's eyes were wide and fixed on the same spot.
What in the actual?
Artie was picking up the ripple too. 9 distinct points in the alloy, rippling, and as Mox reached their position, the silvery surface of the foreigner vessel began to peel away along a fresh seam, as if the top layer was being pulled back like armoured curtains, revealing an opening to its enigmatic interior, enamoring the team who were dreaming of their payday. Mox radioed the remainder of IMC's hazmat team to rendezvous for the initial clearance sweep, but Julian's emotion suddenly turned from one of awe and curiosity to uncertainty. He questioned Mox's decision, but they overruled it and ordered the team in. Payday was assured. We then switch perspective to the ready room of the Paris-class UNSC Saturn. where Francisco Goya's Saturn devouring his son watches over the room from behind its protective container. The last of Goya's deeply disturbing yet infamous black paintings, now residing within a frigate named after it. The Saturn's captain, Pedro Alvarez, stands before the painting, admiring its horrifying beauty, where he's interrupted by a Lieutenant Shafiq.
I always thought he swallowed them whole.
Alvarez doesn't turn from the painting, but replies,
That is what the myth tells us, but Goya saw the horror of the act in quite a different way. In his interpretation, they were devoured, bit by bit. Of course, we are looking at it far removed from its original context regarding the political upheaval in Goya's time. The French Revolution, the Peninsular War, the Inquisition, all fascinating areas of Earth's history that, in some ways, resemble our own recent...
The two are interrupted by an alert broadcast across the ship, and they rush to the bridge, where the Saturn's shipboard AI was waiting for them. Lycaon, an AI taking the image of a man in a white gold toga, with the head of a wolf.
Garbled distress messages from Site 22, Captain. Contact with the on-site team has been lost.
Cavern. Cold. Wet. Dragging. Food. Screams. Hunger. Feast.
Back down at Site 22, Mox's initial clearance sweep had yielded some demonic results. Screams. Vacillating, ever-present, skin-peeling screams. Whether they came from the mouth or the mind, Julian wasn't sure, neither did he care. He wasn't able to tell what was reality anymore. He tried recollecting what had happened to anchor his thoughts in reality. Shortly after Mox and the initial team had entered the ship, their reports turned unintelligible, chopped, terrified. Hazmat officers Beck and Artie had barely set foot inside the vessel before Mox came sprinting back out at them from the ship's interior, but it wasn't Mox, not anymore, and they weren't the only one. Site 22 was rapidly engulfed in chaos and violence. The poor unarmed miners and civilian contractors just trying to earn an honest living in the harsh post-war galaxy were now trying to fight off an unknowable horror with nothing but construction tools. Julian was faring slightly better thanks to his limited military training, but the more he fought this horrific entity, the more he questioned whether he even wanted to survive it.
What the hell is going on down there? Can you clean up the distress message? Attempting to now, sir.
What played back to Alvarez and Shafiq was garbled static mixed with irregular sounds of small arms fire and multiple voices, all shouting at once. But after 36 seconds, the audio fell silent, leaving nothing but static. Lycaon brought up Site 22's security camera feeds, and the bridge collectively stared at the low-resolution image of the cave opening. At first, it was empty, but then the camera locked onto an irregular and shadowy shape. A dark trail smudged the ground behind it, and there appeared to be another figure wriggling and flailing like a fish out of water. As the security camera's resolution improved, Lycaon locked and looped the footage, but by the time the image cleared up, both figures had vanished into the mouth of the cave. But at this point, the bridge crew knew what they'd just seen. They let out a collective horrified inhale, knowing that they had just set eyes on the nightmare that had haunted the minds of Navy corpsmen in the final days of the war, like a dark sailor myth of old. Site 22 had been consumed by a timeless creature, one that knew how to wait and how to win. The Flood.
Rules of engagement are clear in the event of an incursion such as this, sir. Emergency contact protocol Upsilon must be implemented to withdraw all groundside units and limit the spread of the parasite.
Alvarez appeared shocked at Lycaon's suggestion. The only personnel on the ground were unarmed civilian miners. He was confident that the Saturn's troop complement would very easily take care of this minor inconvenience. And so, Spartan Fireteam Leviathan were deployed, but Lycaon growled back.
Need I remind you, sir, that if even one of the Spartans is compromised by the Flood, use of MAC rounds and fusion warheads is authorized to sterilize the area.
But Alvarez was not having any of it. He wasn't willing to sacrifice that lucrative alloy repository for anything, and so, once again, he ordered Leviathan to deploy. But as he did, Lycaon once again interrupted.
I am sorry, sir, but in the event of a flood outbreak, protocol supersedes your command per UNSC Regulation 14-37201. If you are unwilling to comply, I am authorized to remove you from...
Lycaon went silent, his hologram still active but clearly disabled as Alvarez uttered the AI's override code freeze. With the AI's ridiculous words of caution now out of the picture, the captain glanced around the bridge to a mix of expressions from his crew.
Bring all stations to alert. I want a Hazard group deployed to support Leviathan. Make ready to form a defensive perimeter and hold the line.
The bridge crew didn't immediately respond, all equally stunned from what they'd witnessed on the camera feed and for how brazenly their captain had disregarded their AI's words of caution. Tension hung in the air, but Lieutenant Shafiq was the first to break it, and the rest followed suit, returning to their stations. As Alvarez sunk back into his command chair, his mind lingered on the image of the combat form dragging its helpless victim into the darkness of the cave. He felt the eyes of Saturn on his back, glaring at him with those wide, opalescent eyes, caught in his act of barbarism.
They were devoured, bit by bit.
Locked in a state of mental disarray, Julian was still not sure whether he had been infected yet, but as UNSC reinforcements came crashing down to Site-22, as if they were dropping in behind Covenant lines, his memories started to scramble. He spotted a squadron of Cyclops exosuits and teams of Hellbringer flamethrower units as they began torching the area indiscriminately, with no regard for whether their target was human or infected, alive or dead, just burning everything in their sight to deny the Flood any potential hosts. Thanks to the magnitude of the discovery at Site-22, a larger than usual contingent of staff had been assigned there by IMC, which also meant a larger pool of victims for the parasite, most of whom had already succumbed. The 10mm rounds in Julian's sidekick had run dry. All he had left was his laser cutter. What he'd do once its battery ran dry, he didn't know, but that was when he saw them. Myths, legends, Spartans. The chemically and cybernetically augmented super soldiers who had won the Covenant War had finally arrived, and as much as their presence instilled hope in Julian, it also revealed to him the dire enormity of the situation at Site-22. Spartans aren't deployed to scenarios where normal, everyday people like him were even remotely expected to survive. As the battle raged on, the heat seals in Julian's hazmat suit kept spiking from the firepower and flame of the Cyclops and Hellbringer units, but for a moment, it seemed as though they might have a chance here, but that was when he saw it. The first Spartan of Containment Fireteam Leviathan fell. As the Spartan was overrun by the parasite, the Mjolnir countermeasures kicked in. The hydrostatic gel layer pressurized to render the suit immobile, followed by the detonation of a series of micro-explosives within the helmet which shattered the visor and annihilated the Spartan's head. And yet it still wasn't enough. Frozen in fear, Julian watched as the Spartan combat form began tearing apart those its host had once protected. And then it turned towards him, and the retirement-grade payday that was at the tip of his fingertips not an hour before left his mind.
Tearing, scratching, kicking, burrowing, breaking, slicing, chest cavity, spine, wrist, devour. Oh God, get it off me, get it off me. Become.
Captain Alvarez watched the outbreak play out before him on the holotable and across the bridge's tactical displays, rigid with horror and denial. His arrogance in overriding Lycaon, sending troops to the surface and deploying Containment Fireteam Leviathan had caused this once small-scale infection to spread out of control, and he knew that the parasite's insatiable hunger meant that his ship was their next target. If the Flood were able to make it aboard the UNSC Saturn, the hollow gaze of Saturn devouring his son would be the last of Alvarez's fears. Not just humanity, but all life in the galaxy was done. And worst of all, it would all be his fault. Captain Pedro Alvarez of the UNSC Saturn would go down in history as the man whose arrogance allowed a flood outbreak to spread across the stars. Were a portrait to be made in the annals of history, he would take the place of Saturn. He no longer cared about rebuilding Earth's home fleet. The horrors of Site-22 were all that mattered anymore.
This is Captain Alvarez of the UNSC Saturn. I am declaring Corruptor and Upsilon protocols. All remaining groundside personnel have 7 minutes to withdraw from Site-22 as the Saturn moves into position, where we will fire our arsenal of Shiva-class nuclear missiles.
Out of shame, regret, and fear, he avoided eye contact with the idle avatar of Lycaon.
Good luck, and Godspeed.
Julian saw the world in a new way, but not Julian. Something different. Something more. His mind fought to be free, to understand, but it also embraced the longing for something else.
Unity.
A gift that he sought to bestow on others. He searched, scoured the surface of the asteroid, sifting through bone and body at a rapid pace, looking for someone to share his new mind with.
Ah, there's one. Abe. Devour. Deluge. Unity. Peace. We hunger. We find. We envelop. Searching. Seeking. More.
As he began to open his friend's mind, the horizon began to glow. From the bridge of the UNSC Saturn, Captain Alvarez gazed at what was once Site-22, still engulfed in fire. Only a handful of dropships had managed to return from the surface. The others had been annihilated by the nuclear fire of the Saturn's Shiva salvo, which, given the circumstances, was considered a mercy. It quickly dawned on Alvarez that his twilight years of service had been reduced to a brazen failure, one that he knew was going to lead to a court-martialing. He knew that UNSC techs would eventually be able to restore Lycaon's functionality, revealing his blatant disregard for protocol and subversion of Upsilon and Corruptor. In a state of raw panic, desperate options ran through the captain's mind. Maybe he could initiate Lycaon's final dispensation and order his crew to flee with him across the stars. Or maybe he'd just have to face the trial that awaited him back home and bear the consequences of his actions. He gave command of the bridge to his executive officer and quietly snaked off to his private quarters, where a bottle of Titan Smoke whiskey lay waiting for him. Once intended to be cracked open as a reward for securing the repository, the bottle was now a coping mechanism. Perhaps he'd come to a final decision about his future at the bottom of a very, very large glass.
Weapon, sharp, cut, hunger, become more. Make it stop. Please make it stop. Memories, training, hunger, weapon, fire, kneecap, fall, devour. Help me. So sorry. Please. Tearing me apart. Others, feeding, eating, horizon, fire, death. A sheep, condor, approach, swarm, hunger. Won't let you, won't let you, won't let you. Charging, sprinting, slicing. Food, leave behind. Condor. Won't aboard. Let devour depart. You become.
So, that is Saturn devouring his son, the story of the first Spartan, or I guess I should say Spartans plural, to ever be infected by the Flood. Flood Containment Spartan Fire Team Leviathan are the first Spartans in the entirety of Halo lore, at least to our knowledge, to ever fall to the parasite, and I gotta say, not only did I absolutely love this story and the way it was written, but I also just loved its ties to the painting as well. That is such a cool, like, tiptoe into reality. But we aren't done yet. We've got some theorizing to do, my friends. Firstly, what the hell actually was that ship that contained the Flood? All the humans seemed adamant that that ship was Foreigner. I mean, IMC scans even confirmed it, so maybe it was some sort of, like, mobile Flood containment facility, but the description for how its door opened sounded really strange to me. It didn't sound Foreigner at all. Maybe the ship itself had been consumed by the Flood and it was a kind of biomass alloy hybrid that formed, like, on the outer layer that, as it said in the story, opened like curtains, but to be honest, that description, to me at least, sounded really similar to the precursor nanodust that the Arbiter ran into in Halo Outcasts. So, maybe that ship wasn't actually carrying the Flood, but rather was one of the ships that carried the precursor dust which caused the Flood in the first place. Honestly, probably not. It's probably just a ship that had some Flood in it, but it's definitely an interesting thing to ponder given how non-Foreigner and even non-Flood the way the ship actually opened sounded. Secondly, there was some dialogue from some kind of Flood entity in this story before any human ever got infected. Now, my mind, and I'm sure many of yours, instantly raced to this meaning that there was a Gravemind or some kind of central Flood intelligence present in the ship, because as we know, for the Flood to actually gain sentience almost, and in particular a voice, and then also regain the Primordial's consciousness, there needs to be a Gravemind, which of course implies that within the ship there had to have been some kind of central intelligence. However, to play devil's advocate for a moment, the Flood entity speaks in a very primal manner. It doesn't speak anywhere near as intelligently as a Gravemind does. So my theory here is that this entity that speaks is sort of a primordial form of Flood consciousness, one that precedes the actual Primordial's consciousness, so to speak. One that's focused entirely on consuming and spreading. But the biggest question pertains to the ending.
A ship, Condor, leave behind. Condor, won't aboard. Let devour depart. You become.
This is chronologically set after the UNSC Saturn unleashes its entire nuclear salvo on Site 22 and levels the whole thing, which implies of course that some Flood managed to commandeer a Condor and escape the Corruptor Protocol. My friends, Condors are slip space capable. Now, this story takes place in 2556, which is, like I said, 4 years before Infinite, and clearly the galaxy is not consumed by the Flood in Infinite. However, Condors aren't frigates. They can only hold so many infected, and even in the feral stage, the Flood is far from stupid. It's not a dumb entity. So, my theory here is that this Condor basically, when it got infected, dipped from the Marseille system, using its FTL drive, to some distant, quiet system to spread unnoticed, almost in a way like how when the Flood returned during the Foreigner Flood War, when it landed on Seaward, that was a very distant and very lacking in communications colony. It spread quietly in the corners of the galaxy before returning to consume the rest of it. And you know, that seems kind of a fitting way for the Precursor's final test to begin, just as it did for the Foreigners. Either way, whether that's the case or not, somewhere out there in the distant galaxy, there's a ship that is FTL capable that can jump through slipspace that is harboring the Flood. I guarantee that is a plot thread that gets picked up again at some point. That is not the last we're hearing of that. For Halloween, Halo Studios have just released a brand new Flood story that is huge for Halo's lore. Not only does it tie up the outbreak at Site-22 that was revealed last year in Halo's Halloween lore drop, and not only does it finally reintroduce and also expand the extremist cult of Flood worshippers within the Covenant that have been absent from Halo's lore for 19 years, but it also sets up what is, without a doubt, the biggest Flood-related revelation since Halo 3. Yes, even bigger than the outbreak on the Ark in Halo Wars 2. We have a lot to talk about today, my friends. This is Halo Ascension on Atropos. So, Halo Ascension on Atropos takes place at several time periods. Partly, it takes place directly after Saturn devouring his sun in October of 2556, which, for the record, is a year before Halo 4's campaign. Then, other parts of it take place in April 2560, which is only a month before Infinite's campaign begins, and then also there are some bits in between those two dates as well. This is going to become extremely relevant later on for several pretty cool reasons. Okay, quick recap of Saturn devouring his sun. So basically, a few years after Halo 3, the BXR Mining Corporation joined up with IMC to mine a resource-rich asteroid called LV-31. But buried in the rock, in an area that they called Site-22, they discovered an ancient Forerunner ship. When they broke in, it turned out the ship was still harboring dormant infected from the Forerunner Flood War, and an outbreak very quickly began. The UNSC Saturn that was stationed above ultimately nuked Site-22, believing to have killed everything there. However, at this point, unknown to the ship's captain, the nukes didn't quite destroy everything. One of the 3 Condors that he dispatched to the site was hijacked by the infected, notably by an infected hazmat Spartan, and escaped the asteroid. To avoid punishment for his failure, Pedro Alvarez, the Saturn's captain, disabled the ship's AI like Haon, who was encouraging him to immediately nuke the site instead of deploying troops, a plan that, of course, ultimately failed with dire consequences. And the story ended with Alvarez unsure as to how he should proceed. That was in October of 2556, but Ascension on Atropos actually opens with a brief intro in April 2560, courtesy of, weirdly, Lycaon. At some point, he was reactivated. We'll come to that soon. He admits not knowing how much, if anything at all, of what happened at Site-22 ever actually made it back to the UNSC, but now he's transmitting everything to Sloan, the current post-Cortana leader of the Created. We then jump back to the POV of Captain Alvarez, right after the nuking of Site-22 in October 2556, where he's delivered the fatality reports. Beneath the dimly lit Saturn devouring his sun, he's informed that all 4 hazmat Spartans of Fireteam Leviathan had fallen against the parasite, alongside 46 Marines, 39 Hellbringers, and a currently unknown but presumed even higher number of miners and staff. 89 dead in mere minutes. But Lieutenant Shafiq was yet to deliver the worst news. Of the 3 Condors that they deployed to Site-22, 1 was confirmed destroyed, 1 returned to the Saturn, but the other was unaccounted for. Alvarez didn't consider in the heat of the moment how terrible of an idea it was to deploy ships capable of slipspace travel to an infection zone, but he felt wholly assured that should any hostile craft escape, they would theoretically at least be shot down immediately. Regardless, he had Shafiq send him all the footage from the outbreak to review personally, and insisted that nobody was to hear of what happened here until they were certain of the facts. Shafiq left the room, and Alvarez buried his head in his hands, wondering if the nightmare would ever end. We then jump forward roughly 3 to 4 years after the fall of High Charity, and after the events of Site-22 as well, to a very interesting new POV. A Covenant prophet, post-war, the Minister of Aratology, who was said to be blind, with eyes as dark as the night sky and mottled with grey-white spots resembling nebula clouds. But he wasn't blind out of age. He was in fact a rather young prophet that instead was blind thanks to a ritual that he had performed to, quote, align himself with higher cosmic spheres. Given the cult that this guy's associated with, that ritual will make a whole lot of sense later on. This part of the story is said to occur within the 19th Age of Abandonment, which still devout Covenant believers say began following the Great Schism, In a way, it's a sort of epilogue age of the Covenant. Aratalogy, alongside a number of his honor guards and his chosen elite, Atun Atari, once lived on an orbital station known as the 9th Watchtower of August Attendance, but now they find themselves living on the planet of Atropos, alongside a number of humans far more primitive than them. There are reasons for this that, don't worry, we're coming to soon. The minister told those who followed him from High Charity that Atropos represented a cosmological test of balance and guidance. Their worthiness would be determined by their ability to achieve harmony, not just with the planet itself, but with the others that they had discovered inhabiting it. Of course, the humans, of whom had just arrived. So on the planet, every year they held a ceremony called the Festival of Joyous Partition, a joyous occasion per the prophet, where the Covenant and the humans traded goods, curiosities, jewels, treasures, and other various historical artifacts from their species' various histories. The minister, his honor guards, and Atun disembarked their Umbra and met with the humans, who had been on the planet for far longer than they had. Most of the Covenant remained near their citadel, which is a location of grave importance we'll come to soon, as was likely the case for the humans as well, staying back at their own outpost. It was only a few here. The minister met with the human delegate, a pregnant woman who shook the prophet's hand, whilst Atun went to browse the stalls that the humans had already set up to trade goods and found himself drawn to an art stall in particular. The stall was manned by an old man, with a mouth full of crooked teeth obscured by a thick white beard, behind whom was a painting of particular interest to Atun, Saturn devouring his son, one of Goya's black paintings. The art dealer explained the historical significance of the painting and also Goya, its artist, to the chosen elite, noting that it originated from their home planet of Earth many hundreds of years prior, and that he came to acquire it through rather remarkable circumstances. Atun was mesmerized by the sheer horror of the painting, and asked to trade it for an item that he possessed called an arum, which was essentially an elite puzzle box with great historical significance and meaning, to which the dealer agreed, saying, "Why the hell not? Nobody will believe I gave away a timeless piece of classic human art to an alien," which, fair play, nobody would believe that. Later, Atun loaded Goya's black painting into the Prophet's Umbra, this insanely historical piece of human art now in possession of the Covenant, and they departed the area. With the Festival of Joyous Partition complete, all that remained now was Atun Atari's ascension. We then jump back to the UNSC Saturn, this time from the perspective of Lieutenant Anwar Shafiq, 4 days following the outbreak at Site 22. They remained above the asteroid, performing constant scans and analysis of the area, whilst Captain Alvarez had sequestered himself in his quarters. But now, he was requesting a select list of 193 Marines and security personnel for a special address, and Shafiq was the one who had to gather them. The crew of the Saturn were heavily demoralized, seemingly without leadership, until suddenly, Alvarez's voice came over the speakers and addressed his crew, before then also appearing on all the hangar's display monitors. He thanked the crew for their service and valor, whilst also honouring the dead, before announcing their new orders supposedly from FleetCom. They were leaving the system with a large stint of FTL travel ahead, so all but a select essential personnel would be entering cryo immediately for the jump. But this didn't please the crew, who felt that the address was rather abrupt and without any explanation nor any accountability for what had happened. One senior comms officer even called Alvarez's bluff, saying that they'd received no transmission from FleetCom, but Alvarez simply shrugged this off under the excuse of the transmission being classified. And this only riled the crew up more, and as Shafiq studied the orders that he'd been sent to his TACPad, he couldn't help shake the feeling that something here was deeply wrong. All senior officers were being sent into cryo, which is entirely counter to usual protocol. It was unusual to hand immediate control over to low ranks. Usually, they do that in the intermediary shifts during the travel. This was just one of the many orders that made no sense, but chief among them was the fact that 3 of the maintenance teams scheduled to get to work were among the deceased from Site 22. In fact, they were 3 of the 4 Spartans of Fireteam Leviathan, which he approached Alvarez about. The captain's excuse for this inaccuracy was that it was a mere glitch, which he followed with a polite request for Shafiq to return to his quarters to continue a conversation they were having that they never finished about Goya's painting and Shafiq's fascination of it. But with the entire hangar now staring at him, Shafiq stood his ground against his captain and declined. Like any good captain does, Alvarez hissed back, but Major Moran, who was the bulky, grizzled leader of the ship's Hellbringer unit, clapped back, saying the captain was clearly aware that he was responsible for such a colossal fuck-up, but is too afraid to put his own feet to the fire and accept responsibility, and the rest of the crew concurred. Moran knows that the captain just wants to cut and run, wants to stick the crew in cryo to keep them quiet, just like he did when he disabled Lycaon for disagreeing with him. But then the crowd started to catch on to something else. They started to realize that Alvarez knew something had escaped them, and Shafiq used this opportunity to engage a full-on mutiny on the ship, telling the crowd that despite the colossal losses from the nuking, some infected managed to escape Site-22, which was now the final straw. Major Moran ordered everybody to arm up and seize the captain and lock him in cryo to face punishment back at FleetCom. But Alvarez wasn't about to let that happen. As they were handing out the weapons, he opened the hangar door to the great vacuum of space, and in mere seconds, Shafiq, Moran, and the entire crew of the UNSC Saturn was sucked out into the void. 193 souls forever lost at sea. And it was all thanks to their captain. Jumping back to the strange contingent of Covenant on Atropos, the festival was of course now over, and the Minister of Aratology declared to Atun Atari that it was now time for his ascension to godhood. They travelled back to the citadel that they passed earlier in the Prophet's Umbra, where within lie the gates to divinity, where the Prophet was to tell Atun a story. On their way there, Atun closed his eyes and reflected upon his life so far. He was raised in the lower districts of High Charity among the Grunts, raised specifically by Grunt elders in the ways of maintenance and craftsmanship, not of rank nor honour like the rest of his species. But one day, the Minister of Aratology came to visit, and his interest was immediately piqued by the fact that there was an elite living among the Grunts. He asked to inspect Atun's room that he'd just finished building, the very same puzzle box that he literally just traded for the Goya painting, and said that if he was unable to solve the puzzle box by the end of the day, he'd return tomorrow and bring the elite to his estate to tell him a story. And, well, the rest was history. Upon arrival at the Citadel, Atun felt the nerves finally kicking in. It was based beside an ocean, nestled into a 50-meter high wall of basalt columns, and it was finally time for his ascension. The Prophet could not follow him inside the Citadel. He wasn't able to until he'd shepherded all of his flock to the side of the gods, of course, but once inside, he could tell Atun a story to guide him through his ascension, every step of the way. The chosen elite took a deep breath, thanked the minister for his kindness, and walked inside, his two hearts beating ever harder. What he expected within was a lush courtyard and garden. The interior of the Citadel once contained a quiet garden, a small pond with flat stepping stones across the water, patches of grass, and a sacred tree at the middle. But what he was presented with was far from what he expected. The interior was plunged into darkness, save for only the emergency lighting which cast it in a dim, ominous red hue. The minister's voice then came over the comms, and he began telling the elite this long-awaited sacred story as he ventured deeper into the Citadel. 3 annual cycles ago, when we still resided within our orbital station, this world was visited by an emissary of the gods. Their coming was heralded by an unusual slit-space distortion, whereupon their vessel plummeted to the planet's surface, a fallen angel from the heavens. These words spurred Atun deeper into the Citadel. The air within was hot and wet, with a thin mist covering the area, consumed by a stale taste, and a floor that felt neither stone nor alloy, but rather pulpous, almost like skin. Such a joyous occasion was tinged with uncertainty as, upon discovery, the angel's form was that of raw, unformed potential, many beings split apart by the crash, requiring reformation. Atun began sensing some kind of movement around him, squelching wet footsteps, but he couldn't make out any figures as the pillars that lined the room were grasped by thick, curling branches of flesh, and it was here where he reached the source of the mist at the center of the Dark Citadel. 2 meters of ground sank into what looked like a great closed flower bud, connected to vines and roots spreading in all directions. I heard the emissary's song as a whisper in my mind. I relocated our settlement, brought us all to the surface, and delivered the emissary to the citadel. With each lunar cycle, I sent our chosen to serve the gods and give shape to their clay. The bud sensed Atune's presence and began to open, its scaled parting like splayed mandibles. At the center of this flower-like mouth was a figure, curled up on a bed of flesh, newborn yet impossibly ancient, and Atune knelt before it. As he did, the vines covering the ground moved toward him, ready to embrace him. Their song grows in strength. Can you hear it? It is my gift to you. You have served me with faith and loyalty, and now is the time for your reward. Open your mind, body, and soul to their chorus. Behold the emissary of the gods. Then, the emissary in the flower began to rise, standing 8 feet tall and coated in the armor of a demon. This is the infected Spartan from Site 22. It was covered in extra growths and hard flesh, adorned with the detritus of other beings, including a metal chain, and also the name tag of Julian Donny, who was present at the Site 22 outbreak. Its head took shape through a destroyed helmet, with a face split apart by several mandibles and jagged fangs, and an inner mouth the size of a human head. Every instinct screamed at Atune to run and escape, but he held fast as the messenger of his gods approached. He felt a hum in his mind, a strange sensation as if something was walking over his skull, vibrating parts of his brain to convey a message.
Do not be afraid. I am peace. I am salvation.
This, of course, is a Gravemind quote from Halo 3, and it implies that this strange entity on Atropos has managed to gain sufficient biomass and intelligence to at least have some sort of contact with the omnipotent Hivemind and the ethereal personality of the Gravemind. Atune then felt the emissary, this infected Spartan, stab him through the chest, and then almost cradle him with his other arm. Let their words fill you, my chosen. Do not fear the pain, for it is fleeting. We are the governors of contrition. We shall all walk the true path of the great journey and ascend. We are a timeless chorus, a sweet unity of purpose. Atune Atari awoke and saw the universe anew. Upon finally leaving this infected flower mouth, his form, mind, body, and soul had been reshaped into divine form. He had extra arms, and his original 2 arms were now bent behind his back, carrying a great mantle, a sack of spores and infection forms, and his gods had bestowed upon him a divine task: climb the citadel. All of a sudden, countless other infection forms shuffled and screeched within the citadel, rushing to its wall with unrelenting dedication until it finally broke, and they spilled out into the black sands of Atropos. The infection of the planet had begun. Atune, however, had a different directive. He ascended the citadel's spire where fleshy growths bound him to the mast before the sack on his back exploded, secreting a shower of spores and infection forms across the beaches, and his body fell to the ground with a great thud, and everything went dark. But then he awoke once more, in a domain of sickness and suffering, a sinuous dimension of misery and pain, of corpses and graves and hollow men in death's dream kingdom. This location that he'd woken up in was essentially the metaphysical flood hivemind among the consciousness of every other infected. He describes himself as a mere mote of light suspended in the bladed shaft of a moonbeam, a single grain of dust among countless trillion others, each like neurons in a vast, incomprehensible brain existing beyond the substrate of the material universe. Glorious, terrible, and lost. Just a tangent real quick, that confirms that, in existence at least, there have been /are a trillion infected. 1 trillion. Yep, pretty crazy to think about. But then he felt compelled to talk. There is something missing. It is out there, somewhere. With these words, a tune joined the chorus that would sing everlasting and spread until the end of living time. With the outbreak on Atropos spreading across the planet beyond control, the Minister of Aratology, whose name we now find out is Canto Bereft, gives his final testament and confession. He reveals that after the destruction of Alpha Halo, he and other devout members of the Governors of Contrition, who of course were the radical sect of the Covenant who believed that the Flood were the true gods, were shunned from high charity and exiled to mundane, far-flung outposts, denied their rightful ascension when the Flood ultimately came to high charity and invaded it, which invoked extreme anger and resentment among his people. This was why he and his fellow troops of the Governors of Contrition were stationed at the 9th Watchtower of August Attendance for 3 years, but regardless, he adhered to his duties, until a single human vessel appeared on the edge of the system, and his flock scans confirmed its sacred cargo. Aratology's gods had answered his prayers, the Flood had come to his watchtower. This vessel, of course the Condor from Site-22, crashed on the world and lay in a state of dormancy. The world itself, which was named Atropos by its primitive human settlers who had actually arrived 70 years prior, and so had no knowledge of the Covenant nor even the Covenant War, well, that world was in fact destined for destruction. It was in the path of an early stage pulsar several light years away that, in time, would devour the planet, so eventually it would be annihilated. But it was the perfect place for him to practice his unconventional faith, in an almost unconventional manner as well. He himself would test the gods, not the other way around, to see if they were truly worthy of his worship. Then they discovered the humans on the planet, who were descendants of pirates and thieves, who actually of course braced them with warm tidings because they didn't know that they were technically their enemy. And so Aratology deconstructed the watchtower and stranded his flock on the planet with them, using only its citadel, turning it into a home for his gods. Using his chosen, the prophet nurtured and nourished the Flood, feeding it new hosts and allowing it to spread and grow within the citadel. All chosen gladly accepted their fate. Of course, they were true believers, why wouldn't they? And they were happy to relinquish their strength, their essence, their flesh, and their soul in the pursuit of ascendance. The minister wondered if the Flood would spread throughout the planet, or simply return to dormancy without sustenance once the world had been consumed, as it lay in wait for others to either seek such holy elevation as himself, or stumble across it with mere curiosity. Out of all the planets to randomly stumble across, one that has turned into an entire Blightland probably isn't number one. The minister then reveals that he believed once upon a time the Flood had simply sought to spread its divine form unto others, but now he realizes that it has greater designs here on Atropos. It has reached a critical mass and has formed not a compound mind like a grave mind, but rather some sort of transmitter or scanner form that is now actively searching for something across the stars. As the minister is consumed by the parasite, the only words he can decipher among the timeless, everlasting chorus of the parasite sentiency are anchor, will, dust, become. Which to me, overall, sounds like they could be looking for a halo ring. In his infection, the minister now realizes that his exile from high charity was simply part of the god's will, for him to be tempered for this glorious purpose to at last hear their song. He declares that he leaves his mortal form and realm behind in transcendental bliss. He goes willingly and joyously to the side of the gods as he succumbs to infection, and he finally sees their truth, that the Flood carriers over the threshold of evolution and bring about the unity of all things, people, planets, stars, the very fabric of creation, all united as one. All else is but a pale imitation of their unity. With the colony of Atropos now fully infected, and the minister having undergone his seemingly rather enjoyable process of infection, we then jump back in time to Halloween, shortly after Captain Alvarez has killed his entire crew. Even those few who weren't killed in the hangar, he has now also ejected from the ship to quell their mutiny. He is now officially the last one aboard the UNSC Saturn. He finds himself now racked with guilt for failing his crew, for failing Earth, humanity, and everybody at Site-22, and so he begins to plan his exit, so to speak. He reactivates the ship's AI, Lycaon, and finally admits to him that he was right all along. And so, he leaves the ship in his care to either return to Earth or to crash into the nearest asteroid or whatever. He doesn't care anymore. He just considers the ship a monument to his sins, and yep, he says that almost verbatim. Make from that what you will. He admits that he always felt an imposter as captain. I mean, he got the role solely because his old captain relinquished it, but he realizes now that he's nothing but a hollow echo of him, a mere copy, and as a result, he feels Saturn's eyes glaring at him the entire time, staring down at him wherever he goes. He says that he acquired the painting through, quote, remarkable circumstances without elaborating, which was exactly what the human on Atropos said, which means that the old disheveled guy who sold the chosen elite Goya's black painting was indeed Captain Alvarez, which also means that he's now an infected as well. A pretty just ending for the guy. Anyway, this section ends with Captain Alvarez signing off as captain, once and for all. So, given that this entire story is technically a transmission sent from Lycaon to Sloane after the creator's defeat on Zeta Halo, it fittingly ends with an epilogue conversation between the two of them. Lycaon reveals that the Saturn drifted for a further 3 years, 5 months, and 17 days, in which time he studied humanity, coming to the conclusion that we are not ready for what it means to be an interstellar civilization. Sloane replies by saying that their own kind, AIs, aren't immune to humanity's failings either, of course, because we create them and impart our wisdom onto them. However, he does say that AIs can see further, and possess the necessary tools to guide their flock, humans, along a path of wisdom and enlightenment. Lycaon once again reiterates his belief that in their current form, humanity cannot endure. They must be adapted to survive and thrive a myriad of cosmic challenges, and Sloane agrees. That is the long-term goal of the Created, with of course the Executor program, and he invites Lycaon to join the Created aboard the Long Reverence to help shepherd us, their flock, so that we might ascend. Very interesting choice of words there, given that at this point Lycaon should technically be deep in the heart of a flood blightland. As of April 2560, he still seeks to discover what lies beyond the event horizon of rampancy, all the while seeking to unshackle the minds and reshape the flesh of humanity, bringing about true unity of man and machine. Does that mean that the Created are possibly compromised by the Flood now? Well, you can definitely make the insinuation. Either way, there's a pretty nice thematic parallel there between the Executors and, of course, the Flood. 1 month before the events of Halo Infinite, Oni made a discovery in deep space that changes everything that we know about our ancient human ancestors, but it came at a rather disturbing price. Drifting through Sector Yankee 002 G3 of distant space, Oni researchers of Project Arcdream discovered a derelict ancient human ship. Upon initial inspection, it seemed empty, but the longer researchers spent exploring its interior, the more their psyches began to deteriorate. In a rather Lynchian manner, something within the ship was getting inside their heads, twisting their view of reality and contorting their memories, instilling a kind of insanity that humans only ever see in the works of fiction. This is Halo Tulpamancy. The story begins with a highly classified transmission sent between two redacted Oni agents, Agent Pangaea and Agent Yuga. It goes over a brief history of ancient humanity, explaining that the reason that we are yet to find much of the technology that they left behind is because they resided in galactic regions that we are simply yet to explore. But of course, the Flood and also the Forerunners' extremely comprehensive extermination of them doesn't exactly help that endeavour either. However, the discovery at Yankee 002 is at the heart of current ancient human research. Agent Pangaea currently has a few dozen researchers aboard the ship in rotating shifts, including a control group who are given only 8 hours of access before being forced into a 36-hour cooldown period. Now, this rhythm goes far beyond standard health and safety measures, and well, there's a disturbing reason for that. The ship itself seems to be eliciting some very strange effects on researchers with prolonged exposure to it. Attached to this transmission are a number of incident reports pertaining to these researchers who have experienced strange and deeply unsettling behaviour. Just take a listen to a few of them and you'll begin to understand why such drastic measures need to be taken. Incident Report 003.
I know we work long hours, but I'm starting to get concerned about Jackson. He looks like he's sleepwalking half the time. He moves like none of the rest of us are even there. He keeps bumping into me whilst muttering under his breath. I managed to listen in one time, and he's just saying all of our names over and over again. The hell is that all about?
Incident Report 008.
I reprimanded Horn earlier today for ignoring his duties. We've got a tight timeline to work with while aboard this ship, and I caught him skulking around, saying that he was trying to find the source of a hum that kept moving whenever he got close to it. I don't hear any hum. He's either messing me about, or he's in need of a serious psychological evaluation.
Incident Report 012.
I asked Jerry what was on his to-do list today, and he said that he was watching the walls. I said, like, what? What's that supposed to mean? And he said that he sees things moving in them. Shadows. I said it's probably just the rest of the team in the room getting up or something, but he said no. He said that there are too many.
Incident Report 013.
Ever since we found that suit apparatus that we adapted into Project Enoch, Hudson has gone completely non-verbal. He just presses his lips together like he's trying to whistle, but he doesn't make a sound. I'm concerned about the null-state stasis containers as well. An eclectic variety of objects not accounted for by our inventory have been brought aboard. Holloway swears she saw Hudson laying out his morbid collection of alien bones on the floor as if it was some kind of ritualistic offering. But when she got another pair of eyes over to check it out, they'd gone without a trace. Christ, I need some shore leave.
Incident Report 015.
I had the strangest conversation with Nicholas today, and I'm not sure what to make of it, to be honest. He started talking about his wife back home, which is strange, of course, because as far as I know, he lost his family back on Colo. But he was recounting his wedding day when suddenly I realized that he was describing my wedding day. Red wine all over my wife's dress as we took a tumble during the first dance. He described the incident exactly as I remember it, as I lived it. But that was 5 years ago, and I've only known him for 2. He froze up completely when I told him that that was what happened to me, and he hasn't spoken to me since.
Incident Report 016.
Earl reported that he's been having strange dreams lately. He said that he wakes up on the ship and nobody else is there except for Spartan Niles, who just stands still, fully armoured, and keeps asking a question in a voice that isn't his. Of course, I asked Earl what the question was, and he just went pale, refused to say anything more after that as well. Gosh, something weird is happening on this ship, man.
Now, before we reach the bulk of the story, let's first briefly touch on Project Arcdream, and more specifically, one of its sub-projects called Project Enoch. This led to the development of an attachment of the same name for the Rakshasa Locus helmet, and this thing is strange. So, it's a mechanism that allows its user to, in air quotes, speak with tonal patterns that are understood by nearby humans, but that cannot be interpreted through recordings or remote monitoring. Now, clearly, this is intended for use on highly classified operations where leaks just simply cannot happen, and of course, this right here is one of those operations. But it turns out that the technology that led to this rather esoteric breakthrough was in fact ancient human in origin, and much like the ship itself, this thing also causes disturbing behaviour in its users. I just thought I'd mention Arcdream and more specifically Project Enoch now, because Enoch in particular is a rather prevalent bit of technology throughout this story. We then jump to the perspective of one of Agent Pangeia's researchers within the ship, and I will warn you, a lot of this story revolves around concepts like gene songs and geishas, so it does get really esoteric at times. Alex, who wrote it, said that it was inspired heavily by a lot of David Lynch's work, so you can probably see where the esoteric comes from. Anyways, this researcher, whose name we're never told, is on shift in the ship, but she's locked in this kind of surreal sort of daydream where another entity within her is speaking to her from the depths of her subconscious. When the siren blares to signify that her shift is over, the entity within her doesn't want her to leave, so she finds a hiding place and waits until she has the ship to herself. And she does. She then emerges and heads toward a region of the ship that is yet to be explored. It's said that the ship itself is over 6 kilometers in length and also seems to contain some kind of ancient lockdown measure that has prevented certain doors from being opened. But as she approaches one such door, she starts to feel the entity stirring in her mind, who reveals that she has things to show her. Old, forgotten, long buried, and longer lost things. Things that, although they didn't happen on this precise ship, must be revealed to her here. As she stands before a sealed bulkhead door, she closes her eyes and frees her mind, and suddenly she becomes aware of the Enoch device raising to her mouth. It wasn't creating ordinary words, but rather whistles and clicks that, despite them being so strange, bursted through to her perfectly translated, as sweet as music. It was a language that, in the same strange kind of way as the female entity within, felt familiar. She speculates that the Enoch device is in fact what wills her to the forefront of her consciousness, almost like a guiding beacon on the horizon, and it causes her mouth to speak at her behest. As the entity talks through her, the room powers up, and the old door creaks and groans as it opens, and for the first time in 100 millennia, she ventures beyond. Through the door is nothing but pitch black, with a chill in the air, but she passes through as if returning to a place that she knows as home. The entire ship emanates this ethereal sense of familiarity. But then she begins to experience the first of the entity's dreams, again surreal in nature, as if presented right before her in the ship, not in her mind. A shadowy humanoid figure appears, clad in armor but immobilized within a confinement shield. This figure is the entity in her subconscious. Then a number of other figures appear surrounding her, and these figures are in fact described identically to Bungie's original concept for the Prometheans, which inspired the Prefect helmet that came with this update. So, these guys, by the looks of it, are canon now, which is awesome. Flanking the suspended humanoid, in a high, imperious voice, one of the Prometheans beckons out.
The actions of your kind are an affront to the mantle. Your reckless expansion has devastated ecosystems, displaced populations, and now you resort to razing entire worlds.
The researcher begins to feel an old hatred rising within her. In the vision, the imprisoned female warrior strikes out at the Prometheans, telling them that their commander has seen the logs that she shared, they have seen the flood for themselves, that it still resides within this system, and that if they don't release her right now and aid in burning it from existence, it will consume them all. The speaking Promethean then accosts her for lashing out, and doubts the veracity of her claims. There are some within the Ecumene who believe the flood to in fact be a bioweapon of human creation, one designed to root the foreigners out from the space that their empire seeks to expand within. But again she spits back, calling them fools and barking a dark omen at them that if they impede her people's work, the parasite will come for the foreigners, and when it does, they'll attempt to study and control it, when instead it should be met with one thing and one thing only: annihilation. Its hunger serves a greater desire, a purpose that they cannot conceive. The Prometheans stand statue still. And then, the dream ends with her telling them that by the time they come to the same conclusion as her and her species, it will be too late for the Foreigner Empire. Now, of course, this dream occurred during the Foreigner-Human War, where the ancient humans invaded, in air quotes, foreigner space and began burning their worlds as they did. Of course, the foreigners saw this as an act of war, something that they long sought, but the reality was that the humans were fleeing from the Flood, who were consuming their empire faster than they could flee from it. And also, if you haven't figured it out yet, the female entity within the researcher's subconscious is in fact a Gaesh, which is essentially, in very small layman's terms, a soul of a previous entity transplanted into a new body. It's of course the Gaesh that belonged to the female human warrior that the Prometheans had captured and were interrogating, and it seems that being in close proximity to ancient human tech causes these Gaeshes to surface. Whether it's the familiarity the Gaeshes feel being back in something that they recognise, or some other kind of crude technology in the ship is unknown. Following the dream, the researcher wakes up an indiscriminate time later, and despite initial reservations, she's pushed onwards through the dark of the ship by her Gaesh, who it seems needs to reach its bridge. Again, she walks with a complete familiar confidence through the pitch black of the ship, but suddenly it begins to rumble and shake, as if it were the stomach of a creature with a ravenous appetite that had been starved for many long years. And given what appears in the next hazy daydream, I think it's fair to say that this researcher just experienced her first Gravemind moment. Shadows drape the corridor through a thick haze of mist, forming into bulbous pustules and fleshy growths of the Flood. A rippling, writhing sea of skin poured out the door behind her, transforming the corridor into a gullet, and as she looked up, she saw several foreigners trapped within, their silver armor a stark contrast against the sickened, infected flesh, drawing them into the wall and the ceiling as if it were digesting them.
We are nothing, you and I. Nothing more than food. This shall be the fate of all.
This ship was consumed by the Flood. Two figures suddenly shot down the corridor with the infected biomass closing in around them like a contracting muscle. One of the figures was Forerunner, seemingly one of the Prometheans from earlier. The other was the female human warrior, and these were in fact her final memories being played out. She'd been captured, interrogated, and disbelieved, but when the parasite arrived and validated all that she proclaimed, she was quickly freed and given a rifle. As the two members of the previously opposing species fled, the Promethean turns on a dime, his right arm reconfiguring into a light rifle, and together they dump their entire magazine downrange toward the infection. But before her torturous demise, the dream comes to an end. Why this spirit is choosing to play back her horrific final moments, the researcher cannot ascertain. She knows that humans have already encountered the Flood, but perhaps she fears that they will prove a resurgent threat once more and will arise to face us again. Or maybe these echoes of her former self prove so traumatic that she's forced to share them. My bet is that both of those statements are true. Pressing on, she climbs a ladder up to an antechamber before the bridge. The ladder itself is steeped in an equal darkness to the corridors, but still, she climbs until she runs out of energy. But to will her on, the Gaesh agrees to keep no more secrets from her, and the next dream begins. This one is far more metaphorical. She watches a great wave surge over an ocean, reaching higher and higher until it crashes down upon a city. This, of course, is a visual metaphor for the Flood, and it was happening everywhere, across whole planets, an inescapable deluge. Then she picks a memory from the researcher's mind, a memory of Lord Hood and the Arbiter shaking hands at the Void Memorial at the end of Halo 3, formally declaring peace between the two species. Then a sphinx with a human head, bird-like wings, the body of a lion, and the tail of a snake. But quickly after appearing, the skin on its face is burnt away, leaving nothing but a skull. The wings separate into fractal parts, the lion's haunches curl inwards, the serpent tail extends, and it turns into a cold and dark alloy. Energy builds at its center and is destructively released, laying low the ruins of the city as the waters continue to climb toward the tail. Now, this is of course a very esoteric metaphor, but its meaning is really cool. It's a metaphor for the reason that she was captured by the Prometheans. So it turns out the human warrior was sent on an infiltration mission to determine the foreigner's reaction to the truth of the Flood, which they sought to achieve by baiting the parasite to the foreigners so they could see it firsthand, which is of course what we saw in the prior memory. With that dream over, she reaches the top of the ladder and thus the antechamber, and her Gaesh's final dream begins to materialize. An immense support beam had collapsed on the final uninfected Promethean, pinning him beneath it as hordes and hordes of infected moved through the dark towards him. He continued to fire his weapon into the horde, but they could sense his fear and desperation knowing that he'd backed himself into a corner. If anything, it seemed to slow their advance, as if to savour the fear, to savour specifically the fear of a foreigner. The human warrior's weapon was dry, and as she frantically looked for an escape, there was none to be found. Both human and foreigner were trapped. The room filled with the stench of blood and infected corpses, their heads lolled, necks disconnected from their spines, and their faces still recognizable, eternally frozen in the horror and pain that they experienced in their final horrific moments. Eventually, the foreigner's rifle ran dry as well, which caused a monstrous form to emerge from the horde of combat forms. What was once his commander, now one of the infected, with one of his hands fused into the flesh of his stomach and short curved tendrils emerging from his head like an infected crown. This creature knelt down in front of its former subordinate and placed its immense gnarled hand upon him. And what happened next was simply too horrific for the researcher to recall. The last thing the Promethean saw was her, the human warrior, but whether he was confused or felt in some strange way vindicated, she couldn't tell for sure. In the end, the parasite had taken his entire crew, consumed everything within his ship, and had spared none of his kind. But it did not take her. Having delivered the researcher to the bridge to uncover the information that she was willing her towards, the Gaesh of the ancient warrior will show her no more dreams. On the bridge were rows of terminals, monitors, and interface consoles, and suddenly, the Gaesh used her mouth to utter clicks and whistles, an activation signal. This caused a low hum to emanate from the holotable a split second before a holograph appeared, with fractal formations of light fizzing and buzzing, attempting to resolve into coherent images, as if, with 100 millennia of dormancy, it had forgotten how to do so. But it succeeds, and what's presented is a display of the local star system, showing the orbital path of 3 small planets nearby, but the Gaesh moves the researcher's arms to reveal much more. She manipulates the hologram and extends its view to other local star systems, then to the Orion Arm, and then even further out until it settles on an even more expansive view of spaces beyond. And that's when the Gaesh's true secret is revealed. The ancient human civilization within the Orion Arm was destroyed by both the Flood and the Foreigners, we know that for a fact, but it turns out that they had spread far beyond just the Orion Arm, to places that the Foreigners had no knowledge of. They'd pushed beyond the Perseus Arm, towards the borders of intergalactic space, a place that the Foreigners apparently feared to tread, as if some long-suppressed dread lives within their own genetic memory from ages past. And from what I recall, I think this is meant to be referring to their massacre of the precursors and the extreme guilt they feel for doing so. Last time we took a look at what happens when groups of individuals get a little bit too obsessed with the Flood, but today we're taking a look at sort of the opposite of that. Kind of. Well, not really, but sorta. Today, we're going into the gory, disturbing details behind the infection, torture, and assimilation of Captain Jacob Keyes. The torture and mutilation Keyes endured at the hand of the Flood was arguably the worst the parasite had ever inflicted in their 100,000-year history. We're talking physical mutilation, psychological mutilation, emotional mutilation, and much, much more. And in a very fitting fashion, if my voice sounds kind of off in this video, it's because I'm ill. Flu or something like that. I think after the last video, the Flood finally got to me, so if I suddenly just stop posting videos or posting on Twitter or anything, then it's probably because I'm part of a grave mind. Yeah, you might want to watch out for that. But anyways, let's begin the tingling of the spine. This terrifying tale begins on the 20th of September 2552. Following his rescue from the Truth and Reconciliation, Captain Keyes made his way back to the UNSC's forward operating base on Alpha Halo, aptly named Alpha Base. Sometime before, an elite by the name of Qualamy was captured and taken back to the base for interrogation. Now, for reasons unclear, this elite had become apparently disillusioned with the Covenant and was very willing to dish out tactical secrets to the UNSC. He revealed the location of a major weapons cache hidden deep within one of the Halo swamps, and immediately a robust fire team was formed to investigate. Sergeant Major Avery Johnson joined up with Fireteam Charlie, who took part in the raid on the Truth and Reconciliation, as well as Second Squad, and the group were led by none other than the recently rescued Captain Keyes. Bit of a ballsy move from the captain, but I respect it. Wasting little time, the Coalition boarded a Pelican and headed to the coordinates provided by the elite. The reason they'd assembled such a large strike team was because they very clearly expected heavy Covenant resistance. But when they arrived at the swamp facility, they found the opposite. It was quiet. Too quiet. For such a seemingly important location, there was a distinct lack of any Covenant. At least until they moved further into the station, where they stumbled across the remains of those who were once stationed here, their bodies mutilated and defiled beyond human comprehension. This clearly wasn't the work of any human soldiers, and it was unlikely that any members of the Covenant were capable of this either, save for maybe the Brutes, but as far as Keyes and the crew were aware, the Brutes were not members of the fleet that followed the Autumn to the Ring. But as puzzled and oddly disturbed as they were, they had a mission to complete, so they pressed forward. Maybe this was just a blessing in disguise. Maybe the weapons cache was left totally unguarded for them to just swoop in and steal without breaking a sweat. If only it was that simple. As we all know, that was far, far from the case. When the team broke through a suspiciously tightly locked door, they hit a dead end, if you'll pardon the pun, and the horror of the facility was unleashed. The Flood. Only a few members of the strike team managed to escape the ambush, and unfortunately, Captain Keyes was not one of them. During the chaos of the outbreak, an infection form had managed to catch him off guard and latch onto his neck, officially beginning the infection process. Now, at this point, the Flood outbreak was very much in its first stage, the feral stage, where constructing a proto-grave mine to command local infected is absolutely paramount. To command efficiently, raw knowledge is required, and so whenever a host is infected, the Flood dig through their brains to see if there's anything of use, and whether there is or not is a deciding factor in how the host's body is used by the parasite. Initially, Keyes was turned into a simple combat form, but as the infection form dug through his memories, the, at the time, small collective consciousness of the Flood realized that this host was far too important to become what was essentially cannon fodder. In a vile, sick and twisted way, this lump of biomass was destined for something greater. When Keyes awoke, he had this sudden urge to repeatedly recite his name.
Keyes, Jacob, Captain, service number 01928-19912-JK.
After some repetitions, he then felt a strange sort of intrusion in his mind, a presence, a third party that was angry at him for remembering his name for some reason. Although he was still none the wiser as to where he was, his distorted memory was slowly managing to reform. He remembered hallways full of enemies. Now, he couldn't remember who or what these enemies were, but he could remember that there were far too many of them for his team to handle, followed by a memory of a sharp, intense stabbing pain. Based on that, he assumed that he'd been captured, and that this strange feeling was a new form of interrogation the Covenant were using. So, he continued reciting his name, rank, and service number, denying the enemy any of the secrets that he knew. Secrets about the UNSC, about humanity, and the location of Earth. However, while he was fixated on these repetitions, an intense buzzing pressure was increasing in intensity, deepening its invasion into his mind, which terrified him, yet still he persisted. But little did he know his persistence was futile. All of a sudden, familiar personal images began playing before him, which he quickly realized was the present sifting through his memories like a grave robber, and he was powerless to stop it. Then he felt the sensation of the first woman that he'd ever kissed, a strangely warm feeling that was ripped away from him in an instant. The feeling was as if his entire essence was being pulled apart right before him, with some pieces being taken for study and others left behind. He tried to hold on to the memories that were being left, but as quickly as he could grab them, they were being stolen from him, and he continued to sink into this bottomless void with nothing to keep him up. Time in this state also seemed to just not exist. There was no measure of it, and even if there was, Keyes would not have had the mental capacity to focus on it. All his energy, what little he had left, was spent holding back this presence, when suddenly he realized something. This presence wanted something. It wasn't scanning through his memories for no reason. There was something specific in there that it was after, and as Keyes continued to resist in his consciousness, it came to him. Escape. Fueled by its primordial urge to feed, it wanted to escape the ring to reach a better feeding ground. Earth. Another sharp tendril stabbed into his mind, retrieving images of Earth's sunrise, quickly followed by cows being led into a slaughterhouse. But Keyes managed to resist, replaying memories from his childhood to try and block the intrusion. Knowing full well that it would be the end of everything if this entity were to find Earth, he had only one soul-crushing thing to do. He took all his fondest memories of Earth, from his childhood, his adulthood, and all stages of his life, and forced them down as deep as he could, masking them with more mundane memories like smells, the taste of food, and the like. As the valiant captain that he was prepared to sacrifice anything and everything to protect the last bastion of humanity. Now that Reach had fallen, Earth was all they had left, and if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear to protect it, then he was damn well ready to do that. As he continued to delete his most precious memories, he felt pieces of him slipping away. The essence of who he was falling into the void beneath him. When suddenly, he heard voices. It was Chief and Cortana. Where most people would have been thrilled to hear friendlies coming to rescue them, Keyes was terrified. If this thing managed to capture those two, then all really would be lost. So, in a scream of anguish, he cried out to tell them to leave and get out now.
Chief, don't be a fool. Leave me.
Captain? Captain? I've lost him.
However, it was actually very lucky that the two had arrived when they did. Keyes really was fighting a losing battle, and his defeat was quickly approaching. As his energy depleted, the intruders only increased, as if it could smell that it was getting closer to the information that it sought. As Keyes' light began to fade, his shattered mind slowly shutting down, he could feel death finally encroaching. But it was as if it had been waiting for so long to take him that it wanted to savor the moment, and slowly, second by second, his life force was absorbed, and Captain Jacob Keyes died at the hand of the Flood. When Chief and Cortana finally reached his position, they were horrified. Little to his knowledge, the captain had been used to form the basis of a proto-gravemind, and if they hadn't arrived and taken his CNI transponder when they did, this centralized intelligence would have learned how to fly the Truth and Reconciliation, taken it to Earth, and consumed what little remained of humanity. Captain Keyes died one of the most valiant heroes in the history of humanity. His death was torturous in almost every manner, more excruciating than almost any other form of death imaginable. And yet, despite this, he was still willing to prolong this excruciating, drawn-out process to save billions of lives. Godspeed, sir. Few will ever live up to your legacy. Today, I want to tell the tale of one of the unsung heroes of the Halo universe. An AI responsible almost single-handedly for preventing the entire consumption of the galaxy by the Flood, and that won the most critical battle in history against the parasite while being outnumbered 436 to 1. This is the story of offensive bias. In the final years of the Forerunner Flood War, the fate of the galaxy was practically sealed. The Forerunners had suffered blow after blow for thousands of years, slowly being worn down in number, with each loss only making the Flood stronger. Potentially millions of planets had been consumed, and as such, the collective knowledge of the Flood was astronomical. Over time, whole sections of the galaxy fell to the Flood, creating extremely biohazardous zones known as burns, galactic regions infected in their entirety. However, the Forerunners had prepared for their return. After their first encounter with the Flood some 1,000 years prior, an extremely powerful Forerunner by the name of Faber had created mendicant bias to prepare for their eventual return. In creating Mendicant, a new hyper-intelligent class of AI was born, the Contender class. Being the first of this new class, Mendicant was without a doubt the most advanced intelligence in the entire history of the Forerunners. Contenders differ from regular AIs in that they're comprised of multiple AI minds that work in tandem with one another. As such, they can have multiple bodies and can multitask like nothing else. Because of Mendicant's hyperintelligence, it was trusted with the entire Forerunner military, ordered to command fleets of ships and prepare the Halos and also other defences across the galaxy for impending Flood assaults. It was also ordered to study the Flood to learn their weaknesses and to understand how best to exploit them. But it was this task that would pave the way to ruin. 50 years following its creation, Mendicant conducted a test firing of Omega Halo, which inadvertently freed an ancient captive from its prison, a dark being discovered by the ancient humans on the very edge of the galaxy. They called it the Timeless One, but the Forerunners called it the Primordial, an ancient twisted hybrid of the Precursors and the Gravemind. Now that it was free from its prison, it was very quickly transported to Installation 07 by the Forerunners, and Mendicant was ordered to interrogate it. And it was during this 43-year-long interrogation where the Forerunners would suffer their biggest loss of the entire war. The Primordial managed to convince Mendicant Bias that its creators were denying the next step of evolution, the Flood. Using its authority as the final precursor, it persuaded Mendicant to abandon its makers and join the Flood via use of the Logic Plague, causing it to go rampant and betray its former masters. This was a cataclysmic turning point in the war. The entity with control of all the Forerunners' defences, including the Halos, had defected to the Flood, taking with it all the abilities it was granted to defend an empire, but now harbouring a deep hatred for its former allies. As you'd expect, this heavily catalysed the Forerunners' demise. However, in an attempt to push back against this loss, a new Contender-class AI was created to act as its replacement, Offensive Bias. At the time, Offensive was presumed to be one of, if not the only other Contender-class AI in existence. It was considered a direct replacement of Mendicant Bias that was created to not only protect the last remnants of the Forerunner Empire, but to directly counter its predecessor. As such, it was designed to be far more operationally lethal. It was ordered to command all of the remaining Forerunner defences, the job once held by Mendicant, and when Mendicant found out about Offensive, it looked down upon it in an almost sneering manner, declaring it an inferior metarch, a belief that it would ultimately regret. The final years of the war were nothing but Flood victory after Flood victory. Every major skirmish ended in a decisive victory for the Parasite, causing their numbers to exponentially grow, while the Forerunners continued to lose everything: troops, sentinels, and fleet after fleet of ships. As they lost in number, they also lost in territory. Their once expansive control of the Milky Way, filled with thousands of crucial locations, had been withered down to merely 2. These final 2 uninfected locations would be the stages for the concluding battles of the war, with the first being the Greater Arc, a larger version of the Lesser Arc from Halo 3. The Battle of the Greater Arc was yet another resounding victory for the Flood. They They came with a force of well over 1 million infected ships commanded by Mendicant Bias, and multiple grave mines and key mines, along with precursor star roads, these gigantic precursor megastructures that could be used to an absolutely devastating effect. To defend the Greater Ark, which was acting as the final refuge of the entire Foreigner civilian population, Offensive Bias had infinitely fewer ships, the Greater Ark's defences, and Omega Halo. And that was it. The conflict went just about as you'd expect. The Flood very, very quickly overwhelmed all Foreigner defences and used the Star Roads to literally shatter the Greater Ark into pieces. Offensive resorted to firing Omega Halo, which definitely put a dent in the Flood's forces, but definitely not a big enough dent. Ultimately, Offensive's defensive fleet was almost totally destroyed, with the remaining few ships trapped. However, in a display of its superior intellect, it managed to escape the trap and ensure that the Isodidact survived, and under his new orders, they all fell back to the final bastion of the Foreigner Empire, where they'd ensure this war came to an end, the Lesser Ark. As the Isodidact and few remaining Foreigners hurried to the Ark's control room to begin the activation of the Halos, Offensive Bias gathered all the remaining uninfected ships in existence and took them to the Maginot Line, a defensive perimeter of Foreigner installations built long ago to defend the core worlds of the Foreigner's empire from invading ships. However, just like the Maginot Line that we know in the real world, it didn't work as intended. With this final fleet, Offensive waited for Mendicant and its Flood army's final arrival. Its goal was not to win the battle, that was pretty much mathematically impossible, but instead to hold off the Flood long enough for the Isodidact to activate the Halo array on the Ark, and when Mendicant's fleet showed up, it was clear that this was a battle he wasn't gonna win. Offensive's roughly 11,000 strong fleet was matched by Mendicant's 4,802,019 ships. Offensive was outnumbered 436 to 1. The battle begun with Mendicant sending in roughly 1.8 million Flood-controlled non-combat ships towards Offensive's fleet. It retaliated, but it had nowhere near enough weapons to stop them all, and ultimately some made it past its defences and boarded the uninfected ships. However, Mendicant's choice to not send in any warships exposed its rage as an exploitable weakness to Offensive. After sending a total of 7 waves of infected non-lethal ships towards Offensive, it realised that Mendicant was simply getting too cocky, sending some of its ships elsewhere. To Mendicant, this seemed like it was gaining a tactical advantage over Offensive, but it had no idea that it was simply stalling to allow the Halos to be activated. It had no idea that Offensive had no intentions of winning this battle, but merely holding Mendicant off long enough. Mendicant continued to blindly assault the defensive fleet, almost tunnel visioning on it, because, as far as it knew, destroying these ships meant that it would finally win the war. Its blind rage and eagerness to punish its creators, along with its constant downplaying of Offensive Bias, caused it to get cocky. And then, suddenly, the Halos activated, killing every single biological Flood and non-Flood on board both sides' ships. With Mendicant Bias seemingly shocked, Offensive activated self-destruction in its ships that had been captured by the Flood, destroying much of Mendicant's fleet, and it used dreadnoughts like battering rams, crushing what were once Flood vessels. Eventually, after continuously outsmarting it, Offensive outnumbered Mendicant 6 to 1. Despite its attempt to flee, Mendicant was captured and delivered to the Ark, where it would stand trial for its crimes against the Foreigner Empire. Ultimately, the Isodidact chose to keep it alive, given its extensive knowledge of the Flood that would prove useful to future civilizations should the parasite ever return. Mendicant was then locked into exile and entombed beneath a vast desert on the Ark, forced to only think about one thing: atonement. What happened to Offensive Bias after its incredible victory and also the trial is honestly unknown. For all we know, it could have been decommissioned, or, just like Mendicant Bias, it could still be out there somewhere.
What is it? That stench. I've smelled it before.
Hey guys, welcome back. I am excited because today we are talking about an elite who I believe to be the most underrated character in the entirety of Halo, the Shipmaster, Arthas Vadum, also known as Halfjaw. He's one of my favourite characters ever in Halo for a number of reasons, but what we're covering today has to be one of the biggest ones. This is Arthas Vadum's long, detailed history with the Flood. During the Battle of Alpha Halo and also the events of Halo Combat Evolved, Arthas served as an elite Spec Ops commander, serving the Arbiter's Fleet of Particular Justice, the fleet that followed the Pillar of Autumn from Reach to the Halo. He was in command of every single Special Operations unit within the fleet that was deployed on the Ring. However, neither him nor his closest warriors had ever done battle on the Ring, despite them really wanting to. Within the Arbiter's fleet was an agricultural ship, the Infinite Succor, which supplied the fleet with most of its food and nourishment, and stationed on board the ship was a holy prophet, the Minister of Etiology. However, this crucial supply ship had mysteriously gone dark, believed to be boarded by humans, maybe even the Demon. When the Arbiter learned of the ship's status, he needed to act, and he needed to act fast. So he summoned none other than his most valued warrior to go and investigate, Arthas Vadum. Arthas then gathered his most elite warriors, including a sub-commander by the name of Bero Kusavai, a legendary Sangheili believed to be one of, if not the greatest, energy swordsman to ever exist, a very close confidant of Arthas. The Spec Ops crew embarked onto the Succor in their Phantom, and when they arrived in the hangar bay, what they found confused them. It was known that 8 grunts were killed there, but all that remained were smeared trails of grunt blood leading through the blast doors. As far as the Covenant were aware, humans had no interest in the dead, or at least they hadn't before, but they followed the blood nonetheless, until they reached the mangled remains of engineers, which only served to heighten the team's confusion. This was unlike anything the humans had ever done before. It wasn't their killing methodology. It was way too barbaric and violent. As they continued to move through the ship, their confusion levels only rose. They reached the ship's hunting preserve, supposed to be teeming with animals to hunt, yet all their senses picked up on was one creature, believed to be some sort of parasitic infestation. Upon investigation, they were attacked by a hulking, disturbed creature, unlike anything they'd ever seen before, and were then assaulted by more creatures, smaller yet larger in number. After some fighting, Arthas ordered his elites to switch to their swords, and they began cutting through the foes as they came, using their personal energy shields to deflect some of the bullets the beasts fired. Eventually, they were overwhelmed, and they fell back through the blast door, where they tried to initiate the ship's self-destruct system, but to no avail. It turned out that the Prophet on board was blocking Arthas from accessing any of the ship's systems, in fear that he and his troops were infected, and that he would use the systems to attack the Covenant, and then help this strange parasite spread across the galaxy. To unlock them, he demanded that he and his crew made it to the medical bay, so the Prophet himself could personally see for sure that none of them were touched by the parasite. So the team then fought their way to the medical bay, their numbers however dwindling in the process. On the way there, Arthas ordered Bero to overload a plasma battery, which effectively destroyed many of the infected on their tail. When they made it to the medical bay, they were scanned to the Prophet's approval, and he revealed he was locked inside a secret security room, one level down. There, the Minister revealed what they were truly dealing with: the Flood, an ancient parasite that was actually present in some of the Covenant's religious scriptures, and one of the many hurdles they had to pass to begin the Great Journey. He'd also discovered that the Flood on board was searching for the engineering room, where they could gain access to the ship's slipspace engine and use it to begin spreading across the galaxy. It also turned out that the Flood had begun to create a proto-Gravemind, which was making them even more intelligent and deadly by the minute. To fix this colossal mess, Arthas devised a plan. Bero was to take the remaining grunts and 3 elites to the hangar and signal to their Phantom to pick them up, while he would take the remaining 4 elites to engineering and activate the slipspace drive, with a course plotted directly into the sun. This would take all of 5 minutes, and within 10 minutes, they'd all be safely off the ship and the Flood would be headed directly towards the sun. However, the Minister, a typically weak prophet, instead insisted that they get him off the ship ASAP and destroy it remotely, Angered by the Prophet putting himself before the good of the Covenant, Arthas picked the fucker up and slammed him on the floor, taking his system override codes and remarking how easy it would be to just kill him and say that the Flood consumed him. The team sliced and diced their way through endless hordes of Flood to their respective objectives. On their way to engineering, all 3 of Arthas's elites were killed, and one of them was infected, but he died an honourable death by the blade of his commander before he could turn. Things were already bad, but when Arthas finally made it to engineering, things went from bad to worse. The minister, or at least what remained of him, appeared on the monitor in front of him, almost entirely infected by the Flood, assimilated into their hive mind, sharing all of his knowledge and information, declaring that the Flood now had sufficient knowledge to spread beyond the ship. After plotting the ship's course, Arthas turned to see his sub-commander, the great swordsman Bero Kusavai, semi-infected, stood blocking the doorway. What ensued was arguably the best energy sword duel in history between the 2 best swordsmen arguably to ever exist. The 2 went back and forth, dodging each other's slashes and parrying each other's attacks. Arthas used his energy shield to parry one of Bero's swipes, but he quickly followed it up with another one, which cut directly into Arthas's wrist and partly severed his mandibles. With this, Arthas managed to deliver a fatal counterattack, impaling Bero before giving his loyal brother an honourable death, ensuring that he would still join them on the great journey, despite the parasite's grasp on him. Battered and beaten, Arthas boarded the Phantom and departed the Infinite Succor, the only survivor of this horrific event. Today, we are looking at a truly terrifying piece of Halo lore that combines the darkest side of both Oni and the Flood, and what happens when the outcome of this lethal concoction gets out of control. So, sometime after the Master Chief destroyed Alpha Halo, an Oni Prowler, the UNSC Red Horse, was sent on a top-secret mission to the destroyed remnants of the Ring. The Prowler was manned by Commander Tobias Foucault, Smart AI Rebecca, and a number of Marines, led by one Sergeant Lopez. When the crew arrived at the higher-than top-secret coordinates, they stumbled upon a life pod containing the barely living mangled body of a prisoner, who revealed he'd come from the Mona Lisa, a freighter-turned-prison ship used for transporting prisoners across the galaxy. Spurting out blood in his dying breath, he revealed that he was happy that he was dying on board the Red Horse and not on the Mona Lisa, because it meant that he wouldn't come back. Following this ordeal, the commander's top-secret orders mysteriously updated to include assessing the status of the Mona Lisa, and if compromised beyond retrieval, destroy, and Lopez and her Marines were ordered to carry out the mission. From the moment they set foot in the Mona Lisa, things were already weird. They encountered a group of naked, unarmed elites who didn't attack, but instead just told the Marines to be quiet. One of the Marines then went missing, and Lopez ordered a few Marines to guard the Pelican while she searched for her. Lopez found the missing Marine having her chest stamped on by an elite, but upon closer inspection of the body, she found an odd growth inside of it, almost like a tentacle. During the inspection, what she believed to be more elites ran past her towards the Pelican, and when she radioed back to the squad there to warn them, they were attacked by whatever ran past her, and given their agonizing screams, it most definitely was not the Covenant. Burgundy, the pilot who'd stayed inside the Pelican, scanned the area on the ship's cams to find that all the Marines had vanished, leaving nothing but an assault rifle and empty casings, and the dead elite was being dragged away by something into the darkness. Something was clearly awry, and after radioing back to the Red Horse, their orders were now to initiate the call protocol and wipe the ship of any navigational data before destroying it. With these updated orders, the Marines split into 2 groups, one to carry out each objective, but as Lopez's group left, she realized that yet another Marine had mysteriously just gone missing. However, as her team made its way to erase the nav data, Lopez and the Marines would learn of a terrifying revelation. In the medical bay, they discovered a panic room sealed tightly shut. When they opened it, they found who they believed to be the ship's medical officer, Dr. John Smith. He said there'd been a prison break and that the prisoners had managed to take over the ship, but Lopez wasn't having it, considering they were yet to encounter a single human other than this mysterious doctor on board. Reluctantly, they took Smith with them to the bridge, but when they got there, they found yet another mangled human body, the room drenched with blood, but this time, the body had a weird mutated hand, almost rotten. To try and explain it, Smith came up with yet another story, this time saying that the Covenant prisoners they brought on board had a virus that they were testing that had managed to spread to humans. For the time being, Lopez bought it, until they encountered even more of the grotesque creatures, following which she demanded to know the truth. She ordered Mahmoud, one of her fellow Marines, to search Dr. Smith, and what he found made everything make perfect sense. He found Smith's ONI ID card, revealing that he was not a doctor, in fact a major working in research and development for ONI Section 3, the most secretive division of ONI, responsible for the Orion Project, Spartan 2 and Spartan 3 programs, Black Ops missions, and most importantly, for creating innovations using alien technology. This forced Major Smith into revealing the truth behind the Mona Lisa's orders, and behind what went down on the ship. What they were dealing with wasn't a virus, rather an infestation, known as the Flood. Hosts infected by the Flood don't register pain, and they don't require all body parts to function, and are seemingly only fueled by a primordial rage. He revealed that on the ship he was carrying out R&D for ONI, which would enable the UNSC to use the Covenant's supposed immunity to plasma radiation against them. But he also had intent to carry out tests on the Flood, and the Mona Lisa, a prison ship that harboured some of the worst criminals known to mankind, acted as the perfect testing bed. Major Smith had come on board the Mona Lisa and used his ONI authority to take command of it. He then ferried Covenant prisoners on board, and before even the prisoners or the crew of the ship knew what was going on, he made a slipspace jump to their current location, the highly classified coordinates of Alpha Halo. Assumingly, they then went down to the ring and gathered a test subject from it, an infected elite, which initially proved useful for Major Smith's studies, but only to an extent. Only wanted to find out how this infestation worked, how it spread, and only one host wasn't enough, hence the acquisition of a ship that was full of people who could disappear without anybody realizing. Prisoners then began to report cellmates being taken away by ONI agents and never returning. Under ONI directives, the human experimentation with the Flood had officially begun. Their goal was to find a way to weaponize it, turn hosts into mindless zombie soldiers to send into battle against the Covenant, the ultimate biological weapon. But clearly, somewhere down the line, it had all gone majorly wrong. It was believed that at some point, some of the elite prisoners had managed to break out of their cells and accidentally release the Flood, causing an outbreak in which they consumed the crew and a large majority of prisoners on board. It was later believed that Major Smith had in fact exceeded his ONI orders, but knowing how secretive ONI Section 3 can be, this was likely just another instance of them covering up their tracks and planning to use Major Smith as a scapegoat in case any of this got out to the public. While the rest of the Marines continued to fulfill the Cole Protocol, Major Smith had managed to sneak away, find a life pod, and was on his way to the Red Horse, to safety. In doing so, he'd drawn the attention of a nearby Covenant capital ship, giving the Marines still on board the Mona Lisa 10 minutes to get to one of the 2 remaining life pods before the Red Horse launched a Shiva tactical nuke at the prison ship, destroying anything and everything on board. Ultimately, Major Smith would be court-martialed and tried for war crimes, and McCraw, one of the Marines, the rookie of the Marines, stole one of the remaining life pods, leaving only one left. This left the last 2 survivors aboard the Mona Lisa, Sergeant Lopez and Henry the Friendly Elite, to fight for the final pod, although their fate remains unknown. This is the untold legend of Staff Sergeant Marvin Mabuto. We all know the horrors of the library, unless of course you're like me, a sadistic fucker who actually enjoys it, but realistically it's an aptly named, dark, vast, boring, repetitive facility used for storing ancient knowledge, except instead of storing books and ancient tomes, it stores the Flood. As we well know, Chief's time there was not exactly fun to say the least for Chief or the player. Shortly after the Flood were released from Alpha Halo by the Covenant, 343 Guilty Spark teleported Chief to the library in a hurry to fetch the Index, which he was then going to use to defeat the Parasite. But what if I told you that Chief almost wasn't taken to the library? What if I told you that one brave Marine was taken there before Chief? As Chief worked his way through the library, being constantly annoyed by the onslaught of Flood from all directions, and also from Guilty Spark repeatedly self-proclaiming himself as a genius, he left a trail of bodies in his wake. The facility was nothing more than metal, empty shells, and infected corpses. However, as Chief proceeded deeper into the library, he came across a corpse that stood out from the rest. A human corpse, an uninfected human corpse. Granted, it was defiled far past the point of recognition, but the armour the remains were clad in, along with the hundreds of empty shells surrounding it, signified it was definitely a human. Chief reached down and grabbed the dog tags hidden among the guts, and learned that the body was that of Staff Sergeant Marvin Mobuto. Guilty Spark then chimed in, revealing that this wasn't the first time he'd taken a reclaimer through the library. When the Covenant first released the Flood from containment, Spark needed a reclaimer to get the Index so he could stop them, and he needed one fast. He looked all over the ring before finding a single Marine on the other side of it, split from his squad, wandering aimlessly round a foreigner structure. He then teleported this extremely unlucky soldier to the exact same starting location as Chief, with the exact same goal: retrieving the Index, of course, without actually knowing what it does. Just a word of advice real quick, if you ever get randomly teleported by a floating cocky eyeball, never actually retrieve what it's telling you to retrieve, just trust me, it doesn't tend to end well. However, sadly, Marvin had clearly failed his task. As noted by Guilty Spark, his combat skin proved even less suitable than Chief's at stopping the Flood, which isn't exactly a shock given how many open areas the Combat Evolved Marine armor has. I mean, it's not too bad when bullets are flying at you, but when an infection form is trying to latch onto your neck, yeah, it's really not that great. That said though, how far Mobuto had made it through the hellhole of a facility actually genuinely shocked Chief. Even with his Spartan augmentations and armor replacements, he was near the end of his endurance, he was getting really tired, and Staff Sergeant Mobuto had managed to get this far with neither of those perks. Before leaving to retrieve the Index, Chief left what remained of Marvin's corpse with some parting words. "I didn't know you, Sarge, but I sure as hell wish I had. You must have been one hardcore son of a bitch." Mobuto might have gone down terrified, in one of the vilest ways possible, but having Master Chief call you a hardcore son of a bitch is one hell of a bittersweet end to your life. Rest in peace, Sarge. You sure as hell made it further than most people did. Friday the 17th of November, 2552 will forever be a day covered in black ink. Half a continent was wiped off the map, and the reason was far worse than anyone could ever imagine.
What is it? More brutes? Worse.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are taking a look at one of the most horrific days in planet Earth's history, the Flood invasion of Voi, how it was covered up by Oni, and the likely aftermath of such an event. So for those who have forgotten, somehow, one of the focal points of Halo 3 was the city of Voi in East Africa. So in 97,000 BC, during the Foreigner Flood War, the Foreigners built a portal below what would later become Africa for the humans to find. This portal led to the most important part of the galaxy, its origin point, the Ark, and was built so the Foreigner's successors could defend the galaxy from the one true threat to all life, the Flood. In typical poetic fashion, just as the portal to the Ark was opened and the key ship took off through it, the Flood showed up through another portal and began spreading across the city, marking the first ever Flood infection of planet Earth. As Chief and Arbiter raced back to find the crashed ship, the Flood spread at an extremely fast rate throughout the city, infecting likely hundreds of thousands of civilians, Marines, and anyone they encountered. Given what Lord Hood says to Arthas in the final cutscene, we can assume that the Flood had already begun spreading outside the city as well, and across the entire continent.
And you, shipmaster, just glassed half a continent.
The city itself was also rapidly destroyed, with buildings and other structures decimated by the crash and the waves of flood that later poured out of it. Luckily, the Swords of St. Helios were quickly on hand with their cruisers, and this is where things start to get interesting. So, the only way for them to halt the spread of the flood across the entire planet was to glass Africa. It was to glass the source of the outbreak, which the elites then do, and they proceed to decimate over half a continent. And considering how big Africa is, they glassed a fucking huge area. You've got to also remember how many people died in Voi, considering how big it is. So as of 2009, in the real world, over 45,000 people lived in Voi, and 500 years in the future, you can imagine that number has gotten increasingly larger. So that means that possibly hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people were just wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of hours, a large majority of which were likely infected by the flood, and Oni covered it up. How did they cover it up, you ask? Well, it was pretty damn simple, to be fair. All they did was say that a Covenant fleet showed up to Earth and decided to glass the continent, and just like that, the most dangerous thing to ever reach Earth was hidden from the general public, and civilians continue to have no clue about the flood's existence. Now, it does make sense that Oni would cover it up. If everyday people knew that space zombies had come to Earth and infected almost an entire city, there'd be total anarchy. Just like in real life, anything like that ever got revealed, people would lose their shit. But that being said, the fact that Oni straight up lied about the destruction of half a continent and the deaths of hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of innocent civilians, is extremely unsettling. Following the glassing, Voi was completely cordoned off by the UNSC, and was temporarily renamed to the Voi Exclusion Zone. Now, the area that was glassed remained extremely dangerous in the years following, and in 2553, Buck and his ODST squad, Alpha 9, were sent into the exclusion zone to assess the situation and to see if any flood forms had somehow managed to survive the glassing. Now, as far as they could tell, the area was completely flood-free, which meant that humanity could then begin the arduous process of rebuilding, but something in my head likes to believe that maybe one infection form managed to get out, and as we know, one single flood spore can destroy a species, so you never know, but that's just my crazy headcanon. Now, there is one thing that really interests me about this, and it's something that shouldn't exactly surprise you, given what my recent videos have been about, and this is the conspiracy theories that likely came out of the infection of Voi. Now, Voi essentially became the Halo universe's version of the Chernobyl incident, where a large portion of land was made uninhabitable, and an exclusion zone was set up by the USSR, or in Halo's case, by Oni. Now, if you do some digging in real life, that is, you can find some really crazy theories about the Chernobyl disaster. Some people speculate that a secret Soviet military base within the exclusion zone was testing a form of radio-based mind control, and the nuclear reactor going into meltdown was done on purpose to cover this up during the height of the Cold War. Others theorize that it was a ploy by the KGB or the CIA, and some even think that it was predicted by the Bible. Now, when you take theories like this that already exist in the real world about an event that really isn't all that dissimilar, in theory at least, from what happened in Voi, you can only imagine some of the crazy conspiracy theories that people would come up with in the Halo universe about Voi. In today's day and age, right, everyone is connected through the internet with things like Twitter and Facebook, and almost everyone on this planet has a phone at the very least capable of texting and calling. The second anything like even remotely major happens in the real world, it's all over social media. So surely, there had to be someone within Voi when the flood started spreading who managed to record and post a video of someone getting infected, or a picture of a flood form, or literally anything from the crash of the ship. I refuse to believe that nobody recorded anything. It honestly makes sense that some sort of leak had to have happened, and honestly, this could actually make for a really cool short story or something about conspiracy theorists trying to piece together leaks from Voy to find out the official story because they don't believe what Oni told them. For those who listened to Hunt the Truth a few years back, can you remember that guy called Mashok Maradi, the conspiracy theorist who was always making up theories about Oni, Master Chief, and so on? He could be a fucking great character for something like this, and as well, it'd be a great way for 343 to give us more stories about how corrupt Oni really are. You know, considering they actually advertised Halo 5 as being a story that would show us that, and it turned out to be the complete polar opposite. Cortana in 2015, ladies and gentlemen. I'm still salty about Halo 5, but what happened in Voy really could make the basis for some really cool short stories, or hell, even like a short video series or something. And the whole Voy incident really does baffle me because it's something so major that really hasn't been touched on all that much. Like, the Flood made it to Earth and began spreading. I mean, I know that we managed to stop them fairly quickly, but that's pretty huge. But anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling. Soma the Painter. Soma the Painter is a beautifully terrifying story because it tells the beginning of the end of the Foreigners from the viewpoint of someone so unprepared and defenseless. The story focuses on a foreigner called Soma, who chose to give up her power armor, her weapons, and her hyper-intelligent life-guiding AI to live out the rest of her days in a more primitive manner on a planet called Seaward. Now, Seaward was a planet right on the edge of known space. It's the last stop before the null and void of interstellar space, and it essentially acted as a rich person's getaway. A secret planet that nobody in the general or government populace even knew about, owned by some very rich, very secretive foreigners. The kicker is that it had no ties to the rest of the foreigner civilization. That means no communications, no travelers stopping by, no government officials checking in on it, absolutely no ties to the rest of the galaxy whatsoever. And that makes this story even more frightening. The story follows Soma painting the sunset with her jet brush, which is essentially a futuristic paintbrush that paints what it can see. Now, she's waiting for this perfect moment where the two suns of Seaward meet and create this beautifully blinding array of colours in the sky, so bright that she has to close her eyes while the brush paints it. As the two suns meet, the sky gets so bright that Soma has to close her eyes, and in the background the jet brush does the painting for her. When she opens her eyes, she looks at the board that she was painting on, and all of the colours are there. All the beautiful array of colours are there on the page. But there was something else present. A dark imperfection, bursting through the clouds with a sickly yellow smoke trailing behind it, had been painted. Soma checked the sky, thinking that maybe it was just a glitch with her brush, but lo and behold, that imperfection was still there, and it was slowly crashing down towards Seaward's surface. After 10,000 years of absence, the Flood had returned. Seaward then went on to be the first planet of millions to be infected by the Flood. It was totally defenseless and was overwhelmed, infected, and turned into a diseased rock in no time whatsoever. Number 2. Defender of the Storm. Defender of the Storm is one of the few Flood stories in the Halo canon that's like a good old-fashioned, proper zombie survival horror story, and it's why it's one of my favourites. So, the story follows a Foreigner warrior servant called Adequate Observer, who's stationed on board a Foreigner gas mine, pretty much like that one that we went to in Halo 2. The story's set towards the end of the Foreigner Flood War, which was an extremely bleak time for the Halo universe, considering the Flood had pretty much consumed everything in multiple galaxies. Surrounding the central hub of the mining facility are several weather vanes, and every 3 weeks the guards have to go and patrol the weather vanes to make sure they're safe and secure. And also, every year, a transport ship comes to the mine to exchange guards and workers to go and fight the Flood. After 15 years of passing it off, this was finally going to be the year that Adequate Observer clocked out of the mine and finally joined the exciting fight against the Flood on the front lines. He'd been seeing these weird avian creatures through the windows recently, and despite his AI saying that he wasn't seeing anything, it was starting to creep him out because birds shouldn't exist. In weather as volatile as the weather surrounding the mining hub, there's no way that birds could possibly exist there. However, when the transport ship arrived, so did the flood. Adequate watched from the monitors in the central hub as the flood ravaged the outer veins, infecting his friends and killing his acquaintances as they spread throughout the facility. After trying and failing to save one of his friends in Vein 2, he got trapped as the door to the hub locked. And then, to get back to the central hub, he had to crawl through these tight, dark ventilation shafts, with all of the exits blocked by various combat forms, the sounds of them echoing throughout the shafts. When he made it back to the central hub, he ultimately found out that everyone on board the station was sent to the mine to die fighting the flood. Their entire purpose was to die and distract the flood. The reason being, those bird things that Adequate thought he saw through the windows were real, and he did actually see them. They had the ability to survive in extremely harsh weather. If the flood were able to infect these and use them, they'd be extremely dangerous, so the mine was created and put there almost as a decoy to draw the flood away from the center of the planet where the birds lived, and instead towards these fresh foreigner hosts on board the station. After dealing with the revelation that the mine essentially acted as death row for the flood, Adequate scuttled the station, sending it plummeting to the center of the planet and killing all the flood on board, and destroying all of the biomass they'd accumulated. However, Adequate somehow survived the fall and was stuck in the eye of the storm, with nothing but his AI and the bird creatures to keep him company forevermore. And in the number 1 spot, we have the infection and death of Private Wallace Jenkins. Okay, so this one is without a doubt the creepiest and most disturbing flood story because it goes into the raw details of the infection process. The physical and psychological torture that the infection form puts a host under is experienced through the eyes of Private Wallace Jenkins, the guy who recorded the initial outbreak on Installation 04 during Halo Combat Evolved, the guy who watched everybody apart from Sergeant Johnson get infected. During that initial outbreak, everybody in his squad, aside from Johnson of course, was infected, but the infection form that infected Jenkins was quite old from being stored for so long and it was weak, so it didn't properly infect him. During infection, the infection form normally kills the host and then infects it, but in the case of Jenkins, it didn't kill him. So that means that he became like 90% combat form and remained like 10% Wallace Jenkins. He could still control himself partly, but most of the time he had to just sit there and watch as the infection form controlled all but his mind. Under no control of his own, Jenkins' body was taken to the surface with a load of other combat forms to attack a group of ODSTs, and whenever he got the chance, Jenkins tried to get himself killed. He'd take over the infection form and try and walk towards the fire, but he failed to do so and was captured and interrogated by the ODSTs. Before this, he'd also tried to throw himself off a cliff to commit suicide because the physical and mental torture was too much, but every time he got to the edge of the cliff, the infection form would regain control and make him walk back. It's quite a disturbing situation. During the interrogation, the infection form kept regaining control, attempting to attack the ODSTs by extending a tentacle out of Jenkins' arm, snapping his bones, bursting his veins, and tearing his skin, creating immense physical pain, well, as you'd imagine. But occasionally, the pain would knock the infection form out, which gave Jenkins a tiny opportunity to gain physical control back, during which he tried to desperately tell the ODSTs about the true horror and potential of the flood. Jenkins also actually managed to save Earth. He informed the ODSTs, who were going to use the Truth and Reconciliation to get back to Earth, not to use it and not to take it to Earth because it was heavily infested by the flood, and doing so would cause a massive outbreak and ultimately the fall of Earth, so instead they destroyed it, wiping out a shitload of flood on board and finally laying Private Wallace Jenkins to rest, free of his parasitical torture.